Another day, another real-world test. Today we're testing out the Sony ZV-E1, the new vlog-centric camera that Sony recently announced. And as per the usual, we will test out this camera throughout the day, all while we explore a little bit. But first things first. Check. And welcome to Chelsea Market. It was originally a collection of 17 buildings that spanned the city block between West 15th and 16th Streets and between 10th and 11th Avenue. And this area, from 1890 onward until the late 1950s, was offices and factories, all owned by the National Biscuit Company, aka Nabisco. And when they left, the area was bought by a local named Irwin Cohen, who said that New Yorkers care about clothing, food, and shelter. And since he had already managed buildings with garment center tenants as well as apartments, he decided to go with food. And in 1997, he opened Chelsea Market. Chelsea, by the way, is the name of the neighborhood in Manhattan that we're in. Now, I've been coming here for years, and it has one of my favorite tacos ever in New York City, the adobada quesadilla, which here is essentially a taco with cheese on it, and it's a bit larger, that's all. And I'd also come here to get olive oil when I lived a lot closer to it, and it was just a fun spot to spend an afternoon. And over the years, it's become more and more popular. Actually, in 2018, Alphabet, Google's parent company, who owns offices in the building across the street, also bought this building and Chelsea Market for $2.4 billion, which actually made it one of the most expensive real estate transactions for a single building in the history of New York City. I actually went to the Sony Camera Camp event where this was launched, but while there, I had to ask the Sony engineers, what is up with the name? So, ZV is their newer lineup, and it's meant to be a more affordable video camera series. The Z actually stands for Gen Z. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's what I was told. And the V is for vlog. Now, the E, they didn't tell me, but most likely is the E mount, which is the lens mount all modern Sony cameras with the ability to use interchangeable lenses use. So really here, it just indicates that it's an interchangeable lens camera in the ZV line. Now this compared to the Sony ZV-1F, which has a fixed focal length lens. Maybe that's why the F is there. And it's the cheapest in the lineup. Then we have the ZV-1, which has a zoom lens that is also not interchangeable. And then we have the two ZV-E cameras, which are the ZV-E10 and now this ZV-E1. And this follows the tier Sony has sort of started to set with the FX3 cinema camera being a full-frame sensor version of the FX30, which is the APS-C smaller sensor. So the ZV-E1 is the full-frame version of the APS-C sensor ZV-E10. Okay, with that understanding, what else does this camera have, and how does it compare to other full-frame Sony cameras? Well, that full-frame sensor is the same apparently as the A7S III and the FX3, and putting the A7S III and the ZV-E1 side by side, the photos and videos when using the same lens are very similar. Considering how popular the A7S III and FX3 are and how much people love the video quality of both, that is a very good thing. It can also shoot in the same 422 10-bit color as those, and even do up to 4K 120 FPS for very smooth slow motion. But that and the 1080p 240 FPS will come in updates in June, so I can't show those to you at the moment, unfortunately. The biggest differences you'll notice though when you hold the A7S III and the ZV-E1 are the size and the weight differences. The ZV-E1 body only is 399 grams versus the body only 614 grams of the A7S III, making it a good 35% lighter, but also pretty significantly small. Frankly, it feels a bit plasticky, but I for one do not mind, as I myself will happily take that trade-off to shave off any weight and size on my filming setup, since I film a lot outside of a studio. Now, another thing you'll immediately notice is the fact that it's missing a viewfinder, which a lot of people I know are kind of mad about. But as much as I expect to miss the viewfinder for the albeit rare occasion when I'm like in harsh sunlight and I can't see the screen, it's honestly been rare enough while using this that I've gotten used to not having it. And again, the FX3 Cinema very video focused camera also doesn't have one. Now the screen is also a slightly lower resolution than my A7S III, but I can't really tell in most situations. And it is thankfully a fully articulating one, which again, considering the V is for vlog, it would have been quite dumb if it didn't have that. Other quick things to note, moving around the camera, we have a single SD card slot compared to the dual slots on the A7S III and FX3, a micro HDMI instead of full HDMI. It has a USB-C port that supports UVC and UAC standards, so that allows you to stream video and audio from the camera over USB-C to use it as a webcam, for example, and it'll even stream in 4K 30, which I believe is a first Sony camera to offer that. We also are missing the front customizable dial that the other cameras I've just mentioned have, and we have a zoom rocker to control the power zoom of a compatible lens or activate a digital crop that Sony calls clear image zoom that has up to a 1.5 times of zoom that it'll actually use AI to upscale the footage to give a better zoomed image compared to a normal digital crop. And I actually changed the zoom in the settings to only go up to that 1.5x limit because after that I feel like it looks a little bit weird, but the footage up to that does look pretty good, and so it's a great way to get more focal length from your lenses. Also on the top, we actually have 3 mics that you can protect from wind noise using this included dead cat, as it's usually called, but it's more like a troll doll scalp in my mind. Regardless, you can tell what they sound like from audio in this video as it is coming directly from those mics unless it says otherwise on the screen. Now, a clever thing here is that you can turn these mics to aim front for when your subject or you are in front of the camera, or rear for when you're maybe behind it and pointing at something, or omni to catch sound from both front and back. But they also have an auto mode, which allows the camera to decide front versus omni for you based on when it notices a human is in front of the camera or not. It works well enough, but you guys tell me by the end of this video. And lastly, you'll notice we have a tally light facing the front to let you know when you are recording, which is actually super helpful for someone recording themselves to know. And it's kind of a theme here. There's a lot of features actually in this camera that are specifically for solo shooters. Okay, while we're in between places, I just want to show you guys something. So, I've been using the internal mics for this whole video, but honestly, I wouldn't normally do that. I'm only doing that because I want to show you guys what they sound like. I'll probably bring the volume up a little bit, but I won't adjust it any more than that just so we can test it, right? But normally, I would use this microphone that I have. It is a Sony microphone, and I absolutely love it. So here's what that microphone sounds like. It has built-in noise cancellation. It actually gets power from the camera through the multi-interface shoe on the top of the camera, which the ZV-E1 also has. You can also adjust the direction of the microphone with a switch on the back, and it has auto gain, which actually raises the volume of the subject, me in this case, automatically. I was very weary of that when I first started using the microphone, but I've been using it for years now, and actually I barely touch the audio when I use this mic. So all of this just to show you the difference between the internal mics and a proper separate mic. And honestly, in my opinion, I would invest in one of these immediately with this camera, just because it does make such a huge difference for not that much more. I'll leave a link to this exact mic in the description below. But okay, back to the internal mics for more testing. This is the High Line, and it was once a place that I would bring friends from out of town to show them something in New York City that was less touristy. Well, now it's kind of touristy. Originally, it was a working elevated train track that ran from St. John's Terminal down near Houston Street all the way up to 35th Street. And it was elevated back in 1934 from the original street level rail line that was here and was, well, extremely dangerous. But once it was elevated, it would actually stop inside the various factories on its route to carry goods like meat from the meatpacking district, raw and manufactured goods along the route, and even stopped here at the Nabisco building at the time to pick up biscuits, including the Oreo, which was invented there in 1912. Now eventually the freight train wasn't really needed and the railway just kind of fell into disrepair. Back in 1999, however, a nonprofit called Friends of the High Line was formed, and they began advocating for preserving it and turning it into something. After a lot of fundraising, some of which was aided by Edward Norton, funny enough, and a competition for designers of what to turn the High Line into. It seems to be the way that people always get these kinds of things done. Central Park actually had a design competition in the same way. But eventually in 2009, the first section of the new High Line was opened up to 20th Street. 2 years later, the second section was opened, extending it to 30th Street. And finally, the last, clearly delayed multiple times section was opened, extending it to Hudson Yards near 34th Street. I've actually never made it all the way up to there yet. Now it is still a lovely place to take a walk. I would just maybe recommend doing that on a weekday instead of a weekend, as if it's a weekend and there's even like the remote chance that it's nice weather, it is packed. Okay, so this is where the ZV-E1 starts to differentiate itself a bit more. Software. Sony recently launched the A7R5, and with it, their first camera with a dedicated AI processing chip, similar to what we've seen in most flagship phones for a while now. That allows AI and machine learning processes to be offloaded to it to be processed more efficiently than running on the normal processor in the camera. They credit this with helping them to be able to add in new AI features into the cameras that have this dedicated chip. The A7R5 and the ZV-E1 being the first two that have it. Firstly, they have a more advanced image recognition system now, which allows them to extend autofocus to not just recognize eyes and faces like most cameras, but also human pose estimation, which allows it to determine a human shape from the body and not just the face. Now, what this does in the real world is that it allows the camera to lock on easier and also keep autofocus if, say, that human's face is hidden briefly or they are moving, and it can even guess where they'll be in the near future, apparently, to do a better job at keeping focus. And I have to say that I do notice the autofocus on this camera, specifically when shooting people, does a better job or just feels more solid than my A7S III does, which is nuts. Now, in addition to that, we can also select more subjects besides just humans. So that includes animals like dogs and cats, but also birds, cars, trains, airplanes, and even insects. None of that I really need personally, but maybe somebody does. And there's some other AI-based features that might also be useful, especially for solo shooters. In Eye Auto mode, for example, it can automatically adjust the aperture when someone else comes into frame and might be slightly behind or in front of the main subject to make sure that they are both in focus instead of just one person being in focus. It can also do a clever auto-framing feature, which when turned on, you can set the camera on a tripod, for example, and it'll crop in and also pan automatically when it detects a person to give you a more dynamic scene, which you can control the speed and the level of crop to your liking, which is clever and novel. And we also have a framing stabilizer mode that, again, you can choose the level of crop and also the position you want the subject to be in, but once you do, it'll keep the subject as best as it can in that spot, even while doing a tracking shot with the camera, like moving along the side of that person while they're moving. Now, I don't see myself probably using a lot of these features often, if at all, but I could see how certain people in certain circumstances, especially when shooting themselves, could get some good use out of these. Speaking of stabilization, we have the same stabilization from the A7C, so slightly less than compared to the A7S III, but if we're honest, Sony's stabilization on full frame cameras at least is never really that amazing on its own, but when you turn on active mode, it crops in about 10% and it uses software stabilization on top of the in-body stabilization, and that helps enough to the point where I shoot almost everything handheld on my A7S III. The ZV-E1, however, takes this up a bit by introducing dynamic active stabilization, which can crop in even further, and because of that can compensate for even more shake, which is nice to have actually, and it works really well for shots that, you don't mind a very cropped in shot, of course. And the way it does this actually is it uses that clear image zoom that we talked about before, where it can zoom in and up-res the footage a little bit, and then once it has that, it then has a lot more area around it on the frame to kind of move around and compensate for more shake. And one other feature in here that I'm happy about actually is the new time-lapse feature. And normally, you would use a feature called interval shooting, and it would take a photo every specific amount of time that you set, and then you'd put all of that into your video editing software and combine it into a video to get a time-lapse. But now, the camera actually has its own way of taking those photos and combining them into a video right in the camera. It seems simple, sure, but it's nice to finally see. Okay, made it to the end of the High Line. This is Hudson Yards. It's a development project that originally sort of came into being back in 2012 when New York City was bidding for the Summer Olympics and wanted to turn this space into the West Side Stadium. But New Yorkers rejected that part of the plan because, well, anytime there's a stadium in Manhattan, the surrounding neighborhood kinda just isn't great. I'm looking at you, Madison Square Garden. Anyway, having squashed that idea, the city approved new plans that included residences, cultural spaces, shopping, restaurants, etc. And that would eventually become known as Hudson Yards. The name is two parts. One being the Hudson River, which is the river that borders Manhattan to the west, which is right here. And Yards is because a huge portion of this area sits on top of the West Side Yard, which is a storage facility for the Long Island Railroad train cars during the day after the morning rush brings people in on them into the city from Long Island. And this allows them to stay there and wait for the evening rush hour back out instead of just having to be sent back to Long Island empty only to have to return later on. The original developer of the train yards, well, he was clever. And he knew that there would be a lot of value to the air rights above the yard. And so he built the platforms wide enough to be able to accommodate building something on top of the yards. The trains are actually still stored under here to this day. Okay, so I want to address a couple of things that seem to be a concern with this camera for a lot of people and what my experience has sort of been with them. Let's start with overheating. So on paper, the ZV-E1 has a shorter continuous runtime than the A7S III, for example. But I, for one, have never had an issue with my A7S III overheating, except maybe one day where I was just shooting way too much 120 FPS 4K for slow-mo. And even that honestly took a while. Today, shooting all day with this camera, admittedly mostly in 24 FPS, but I haven't had any issues. And I haven't since I've been using the camera for a couple of weeks now. The truth is, the overheating test that you see with the camera running continuously for 40 minutes or whatever is something you would just not really do very often. You usually just get the shot you need, stop recording, get another one, stop recording, and so on. So unless you're live streaming for long periods or maybe shooting longer interviews, I wouldn't be too concerned personally, at least with my shooting vlog-like reviews like I do. If you do think that you'll be shooting longer continuous shots, then I'd maybe look at the FX30 or the FX3, as those actually have fans to help with cooling. Now, another thing I've seen some people mention that they are concerned about on the camera is the fact that we have an electronic shutter and no mechanical one. Now, this saves money and weight compared to a mechanical shutter that opens and closes a flap to expose the sensor to light to take a photo or a video. Now, instead, it takes an image one line of pixels on the sensor at a time, and it does so line by line until the entire sensor and image are taken. Now, this happens insanely fast, so most of the time, you won't notice. 2 times you will notice this. The first one is when you're using a remote flash with your camera and you're using it at a pretty high shutter speed. What will happen is that flash only goes off for a short period of time. So the light might change slightly between when the sensor takes that first row of the image to when it takes the last. And this results in banding usually. But again, this camera's not really meant to be used in scenarios like that, like studio photography. So for most people getting this camera, it's probably not going to be that big of an issue. The other downside is what is called rolling shutter, which is a similar concern in that, let's say you're panning quickly and it's taking multiple frames each second and one line at a time, some of the image it's capturing might be slightly off compared to the next line of capture on the sensor, and so on. It's basically what's happening when you see that sort of jello-looking effect in videos. But from testing with this camera, the sensor seems to read fast enough that you don't really get much of that effect. It seems pretty well controlled. With that said, I don't think anybody that is, again, in the market for this particular camera is going to care that much about an electronic-only shutter. Now, as far as battery life is concerned, I ended up using 1 full battery today, and I have about 75% left on this current battery. And so with that, I think the battery life feels very similar to my A7S III, if not maybe slightly better. But regardless, that's to say it's pretty good, and a lot of that comes down to these much larger new batteries that Sony uses called the NPVZ100s. Hello. Okay, calling it a night. And while it is important to compare this camera to other Sony cameras to see where it is in the lineup and to see if its features and its price are of value compared to those other cameras, the truth is the demographic that Sony is trying to get with this camera is actually probably more likely coming from these. And this is why there are more touchscreen controls on this camera than on anything else in the Alpha line. There's modes like background defocus, which in eye auto mode is the button to give you a more bokeh look, like blurring the background more, without the person needing to know that it just kind of sets the aperture wide open, or the fact there are looks, as they're called in eye auto mode, that very much feel like Instagram filters. The idea with the ZV line in general is that it's kind of aimed at content creators who are posting a lot of videos and maybe some photos to social. And maybe they're just now ready to step up to a bona fide actual camera. Again, they have the entry-level ZV-1F, the ZV-1 above that, the ZV-E10 for those that are maybe a bit more serious, and now the ZV-E1. This is now the top of the line ZV series camera, and it's probably for those content creators that maybe are making a little bit of money, or they just want to step it up to a level that they're seeing other professional content creators do with the very popular A7S III and FX3. And sure, it's not without some sacrifices, as we've mentioned throughout this video, and also some little things that bother me as well, like I wish the grip was bigger. I wish there was more customizable buttons. I wish there was an easier way to switch modes like I have on the dial of my A7S III, etc. But all of that doesn't bother you as much if, one, you've never used those two other cameras, again, maybe you're coming from a phone, and two, if you're saving up to half off on this camera compared to those. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys. I will leave a link below to the best deal that I can find on this camera, and I'll regularly update it, as always. Also, this is my first real-world test on a, camera. So if you're new here, let me know if you enjoyed my weird little format that I do. Also, subscribe and ding the bell if you're not already, and you can check out the rest of the real-world test series. We've explored a lot of places with a lot of tech at this point. And also, let me know what you guys think I can improve for my next camera real-world test. Gonna probably do more of these going forward. I am now going to bed because I'm exhausted. It is midnight now. That's how long we've been filming. So, yeah. Good night. Try and film in one of the busiest places in New York City. Yep, that was dumb. As always. The High Line goes over a decent amount of highway. It's always my fault. But New Yorkers quickly rejected that part of the plan as, oop, there's a guy just scrubbing the ground next to me. Top of the west side. Woof, woof, woof. Can't win, I can't.